Do you love using underrated weapons? Do you enjoy comboing your weapons together? Do you love minicrits? If you said yes to any of my inquiries, I have the guide for you. How yinz doing? I'm Ian, and this is my TF2 How to Kill Streak series, where we look at the best and worst this game has on offer, and I show you how to get a kill streak with it, because everything is a bad idea until it works. Today, as you could tell by reading the title and thumbnail of this video, we'll be covering the Fan O War. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
If fighting is sure to result in victory, then you must fight! Sun Tzu said that.
The Fan O War is a melee weapon for the Scout, and was added back in 2011 in the Shogun pack alongside some other Asian-themed items, and were given in genuine quality to those who pre-ordered Total War Shogun 2. Nowadays, however, if you want this weapon, you'll need to fuse a Mad Milk with a scrap metal in the crafting menu, wait for a random drop, or resort to trading with other players in order to get this item. As for what this thing does, at the cost of dealing only a quarter of the damage you would do normally with your stock baseball bat, your melee weapon is granted guaranteed crits when you would normally get a mini crit, and all players you hit with this weapon are marked for death for 15 seconds, meaning all damage inflicted upon them will be mini crit boosted. This makes the Fan O War the meta melee of choice in man vs. machine, since it lets you boost your entire team's damage output against the giant robots that can often be troublesome to deal with. Please bear in mind that the mark for death debuff that you can inflict on other players with this weapon can only be inflicted to one player at a time, so if you try to inflict it on multiple players at once, the debuff will simply transfer to whoever you hit last. Since your melee damage is going to be 26 damage on a critical hit, you're better off using a fish to go for melee kills on players if your goal is to kill people exclusively with your melee weapon. However, that's not where this weapon shines. This is a combo tool you use to soften up opponents with guaranteed mini crits so you can more easily finish them off with your primary or secondary weapon of choice. I recommend using this against Bushwaka Jarate combo snipers since you can effectively use this weapon to beat them at their own game. Some players will use the Fan O War alongside the previously covered Soda Popper to use the guaranteed mini crits it provides to help build up the height meter faster. However, in all honesty, any primary except the backscatter is an excellent combo tool alongside the Fan O War. I advise against the backscatter since if you're using the Fan O War, you already have guaranteed mini crits on your opponents regardless if you're behind them or not, so long as you can get a good melee hit on them in the first place. I also advise against using the Criticola for similar reasons to the backscatter, since these three weapons together make each other super redundant, and should not be used together in any capacity unless you enjoy using objectively bad loadouts. When using the Fan O War, it's best to avoid large groups of players since your melee hits deal next to no damage, and you can only mark for death one player at a time. The mark of death debuff you inflict on players with this weapon, however, will persist even after you die or switch weapons, meaning you can actually get assist kills even from the grave. Meaning even in death, your kill streak endures. Still, when you're playing Scout, you have the durability of a weight paper towel in close quarters, so it's best to avoid using your melee against players who are fully aware of your existence, especially if there's more than one of them. If enemy players are aware of where you are, you're best off using your secondary weapons to whittle away at the opponents until you find a good opportunity to strike, or just try to run around the map and look for some easier targets to take out. Remember, the Fan O War is a weapon you use to debuff players before you kill them with your primary weapon at point-blank range in order to ensure they don't have a chance to react to your second shot. This is not a weapon you use on Demo Knights to try to beat them at their own game with. Remember, when you're using this melee weapon, you're only going to be doing at most 26 damage on a critical hit. For some perspective, hitting someone with a fish does 35 damage. No critical hits required. Remember, the Fan O War is best used as a tool for setting up your kills rather than a tool for killing people directly. Remember, while you can only mark for death one player at a time, that player is marked for death for 15 seconds after you hit them with this melee weapon. And I don't think I need to explain this, but 15 seconds is more than enough time for you to switch to your other weapons to kill whoever you want dead. What might need explaining, however, is that players you have marked for death are effectively not going to be susceptible to damage falloff whatsoever. Damage falloff, for those of you not in the know, is a mechanic in Team Fortress 2 that makes it so that when you're using most weapons, you'll actually do less damage the further away you are from your target. So if you feel like your scatter gun has been doing a lot less damage than it should do at long range even when you account for the bullets spreading out, this is the reason why. However, when a player is marked for death, all damage you do is guaranteed mini-crits, and critical hits and mini-crit damage is not susceptible to damage falloff whatsoever, meaning the overall damage you're going to do against targets you have marked for death is going to be a lot more than you initially thought in all likelihood. Because of this feature, I recommend using the pistol over any other secondary when using the Fan O War, since your stock pistol can get more mileage out of this feature than any other secondary in the Scout's arsenal. The Pocket Boy's pistol is an acceptable alternative if you're willing to trade overall damage for the ability to self-heal, whilst the Winger is in a similar boat to the Pocket Boy's pistol, just to replace self-healing properties with increased mobility, since despite the Winger's increased damage per bullet, the reduced clip size means your overall DPS will be far less than a stock pistol. If you find Afterburn and Pyros by extension to be a troublesome menace for you in a typical game, I recommend switching to the Bad Milk, since this is unquestionably your best utility for dealing with that situation. I advise against using the Bonk Atomic Punch, however, since while it is a good way of getting behind the enemy lines, that's kind of like saying robbing a bank is a good way to make money. Sure, you're technically right that it is an effective way to get a lot of what you want, but realistically you're gonna get swamped by everyone within a mile radius of you and end up in a situation that you are not equipped to handle in any serious capacity. And while yes, the Bonk Atomic Punch can be used as an escape tool to give you some temporary invulnerability to get out of dicey situations, realistically, if you need to use this weapon to get out of a bad situation, you are probably doing something you shouldn't be in the first place. After all, the Scout has the highest movement speed in the entire game and the ability to jump in mid-air. So if you need to sacrifice your ability to attack whatsoever for complete invulnerability, you were probably planning something that you were just completely not cut out for, and it's about to go horribly wrong or horribly right. Either way, you're probably gonna end up in some shitty frag video on YouTube somewhere. All in all, I give the Fan O War an underrated out of 10. It's a good weapon that gets overlooked by the Rap Assassin, since the Rap Assassin is effectively a secondary disguised as a melee weapon. Meanwhile, the Fan O War is effectively a melee weapon that realizes that you're never going to pull out your melee weapon as Scout to do raw damage, and instead sacrifice that damage almost entirely in favor of giving you a utility ability that makes it so you'll actually use your melee weapon whatsoever, rather than having your melee weapon be a panic tool you pull out whenever your opponent is one hit away from death and you don't have time to reload. That's all for now though. Like the video if you did, subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one, comment what weapons you want to see me cover in the future. I've been Ian, you have been you, and this has been my TF2 How to Kill Streak Guide to the Fan O War. And stay tuned, the KGB is coming up next.